Chapter 6. In Droathla and Skully, I think I have memories of there. Droathla was north of Okasela, and the easiest way to get there was by airship. When Nisul had still been at university, the Cantria Alliance had marginally controlled the area, and so portaling there was possible. But now Droathla and the nearby town of Telia were a no-man's land. The Cantria Alliance had crumbled, purely for economic reasons, and none of the more advanced governments, cults, or warlords had much interest in it. Nowadays, when one went from Okasela to Droathla, the good news was that it was peaceful and safe. The bad news was it took slow transit to get there. Droathla was what most people assumed the ancient ruin was called. In actuality, Droathla was the name of a caved-in mine that became a pretty lake nearby. Paleolinguists were reasonably sure the city was called something like Ard Adat, based on psychic impressions left in the stoneworks. Et atarat canas a fael. Fael ve'en daho. I don't know why I said that, Skully, but I think that's my language. Nonetheless, even the Hraith Encyclopedia erroneously says, and I quote, "Although we call the ruins Droathla, we have no idea what the original inhabitants called it." But they do have some idea, Skully. Most people, academics that is, believed it had been inhabited by proto-elves or elf precursors. Proto-elves were controversial enough, but elven precursors were even more controversial. That would imply they had a recent common ancestor with humans, dwarves, and other incarnates, perhaps even beast folk. The more rational common origin theory was off-putting to many, as the sundering creation myths were foundational to some more conservative cultures. Nisul was there to study bones, ancient genes, and to a lesser extent scripts of writing, though this in and of itself was more evidence of cultural transmission than anything else. With the right evidence, common origin could go from a likely theory to accepted fact. But the controversial nature of common origin theory was why it was so hard for Nisul to get funding. There had been a group in the city who were eager to provide Nisul with funding to look for evidence all elves share a common ancestor. This was a comparatively progressive group, but they'd requested Nisul's assurance her research would not enter into the area of common roots for elves and humans. They thought that this was, in a complex manner, offensive to the cultural identity of both humans and elves. Of course, she did not get this funding because she could not promise conformity to this idea. The evidence would say what it would say, and the analysis would land where it would. And so here she was, back at Droathla again. She was here to take meta-images for a new research proposal. But the truth was she was hoping her presentation at convention would do well enough so that she could self-fund for a season. Nisul gained a certain internal order from the pursuit of research and academic knowledge which nothing else equaled. Nisul had brought with her on this expedition, if one could call it that, her friend Lyra. Lyra was one of the few other female elves Nisul was friends with, and rarer still as Lyra was not part of the gaming community, but was one of the few friends Nisul had retained from university. Lyra was no shrinking earthplant, but regarded the world with a certain suspicion, which could translate outwardly to the appearance of timidity. This in turn produced an emboldening effect when Nisul was in her company. "So, you're here to image this place?" asked Lyra, shifting the shoulder strap of her equipment bag into a new position. "Yep," said Nisul, pausing to check her map against the landscape around them. "Are you using a special meta-portrait, or a regular one?" "Just a regular one," The same one I use for pictures of the street scenes I take, said Nisul. Oh, said Lyra, almost sounding disappointed. There have to already be a bunch of images of this place, said Lyra. There are, said Nisul. What I am doing is documenting what I want to dig and why, finding whatever it was she was looking for. Nisul rested her bag on the ground as she dug out her meta-imager for another image shoot. Why do you want to dig where you want to dig? Asked Lyra, placing her bag next to Nisul's. 2 reasons. 1, I believe we can find something to go a long way toward proving common origin. And 2, I believe I can find something without disturbing what's there too much, so there's something left for people who come in the future with better methods. Nisul replied without looking as she made adjustments to her camera equipment. Bones. You're looking for the bones of people, right? Asked Lyra. Yep, said Nisul as she took more images. Nissa, said Lyra. Nisul. Lyra corrected herself, knowing Nisul would likely not want to be called by that name variant. It seems to me like this could make you happy. I mean the archaeology. Nisul paused between shots, her voice gaining a terse, controlled edge. I am an archaeologist, Lyra. I just don't have funding. Picking up on Nisul's mood, Lyra desperately wanted to console her friend, but also remain a voice of reason. Nisul, I understand why you don't want to take the funding for this site if you have to fudge results. And I know you're really only happy doing the gaming thing or archaeology. I want to make money as a consultant with the guild to fund my work here, said Nisul, her voice gaining an almost mech-like quality. I know, but right now, you're not happy. Odd jobs, spot magecraft, retail. I understand why you don't want to do this dig if you can't do it right. But what about something else? Something not morally objectionable to you? Early mech sites, the marches, or the South Continent. I know it doesn't have the zing of a discovery of incarnate origins, but it's not. Lyra's voice trailed off, not sure how to navigate the conversation further. Morally compromised? Nisul offered her friend a hard glance. She could see the obvious concern pouring from Lyra's expression and turned away with a heavy sigh. You're not wrong, Lyra. Archaeology in and of itself is not my passion. I've tried to explain this to you when we were at school, but back then I can't say I spoke very directly, said Nisul, her voice heavy with regret. You still don't. Sometimes I feel like the things you say are a little vague. You know, it's fine to take your time with your words. Lyra approached slowly, as if not to spook her, the desire to physically comfort her friend almost overwhelming her. Nisul was getting annoyed with Lyra. Somehow during her university years, Nisul had developed the idea she needed to fill her speech with qualifying words, make things she was certain of sound conditional. And here was Lyra trying to help, but reading the situation wrong. At least by Nisul's definition of wrong. Lyra was reading that Nisul had perhaps what one would call a cognition issue. But this was not the case. Nisul could connect the concepts to words just fine. She could say exactly what she should have said or wished she had said later, alone. She felt she couldn't say it in the moment. Anger rose up in Nisul. She was pushed by 2 simultaneous instincts, 1 to repress it, and 2 to blast Lyra with it. But poor Lyra was not part of her problem. Or if she was part of the problem, she was less part of the problem than anyone. The least part of the problem? Was that something one could be? But instead, Nisul managed to let just the right amount of anger up. Lyra, the thing is, archaeology fascinates me. But if I am not doing something to tear down these creation myths and their toxicity, it lacks meaning. I need something that stimulates me and has meaning, and for me, this is it. Nissul opened her arms to their surroundings, solidly claiming it as her purpose. And my best bet is to do something profitable. My other talent is as a gamer, or maybe as a consultant to the game guilds. Nissul glanced at Lyra again, this time with a tick less aggression. And I know, Lyra, I know very few people make it doing that. But the ones that do make it. And they have a lot of free time to live the good life with that money. Eating, traveling, meta-influencers. But there is no reason if I make it, if I can't use the money to fund a dig here, at this site. Okay, said Lyra, clutching her arms around herself in an effort to self-soothe, seemingly convinced but also exhausted. The gaming, though, Lyra said haltingly, not wanting to start an argument, but saying what she felt must be said. You're worried I'll go crazy again? Nissul snorted derisively. I wouldn't call it crazy, said Lyra. I'd never label anyone else as crazy or not. But in my own case, I thought Earthgame and my character might be a kind of real, or were real. That's crazy. But Lyra, me being out here, working on both my gaming and my career. Archaeology, I mean. Nissul trailed off, a bittersweet smile playing at her lips. Is that what people in your field call it? Archeo. I like it, said Lyra, offering Nissul a playful nudge. Nissul smiled, her coiled, vibrant red hair bouncing with the motion. That's what I call it. Someone else in the world probably does too, said Nissul. Anyway, how about you? I married an elf boy and we both do high-level admin. I became what I said I wouldn't. And I am unhappy sometimes that I'm not that unhappy about it, said Lyra. It was her turn to offer a bittersweet smile. You still do great art, Lyra, said Nissul, gently returning her friend's nudge. Alun is really great. He gives me a push every few paintings or so to do a gallery. We aren't the stiffest stiffs, he and I, said Lyra, laughing lightly. I don't think you guys are stiff at all, said Nissul. You're out here on a ruin site with me. How come no one remembers this place? Asked Lyra. Well, there's LGR folks who were around in that time on the South Continent, right? So why don't any revenants remember this place? Who knows, said Nissul, studying the structures around them for clues. I meant that if there was, would people allow that? Asked Lyra. I'm not sure I follow. Nissul gave Lyra an honestly curious look. Well, some ghosts are still, they still identify as humans or dark elves in addition to being ghosts, said Lyra. They don't identify as dark elves or humans or mechs, Lyra. They are. They are those things. Just as much as you and me, said Nissul, and she meant what she said. I believe you are what you identify as, I do. I just didn't mean the verb. But what I meant was, if there was a revenant who in flesh had been an elf from before the Sundering, or somebody who was a common ancestor of all incarnates, and they still identified as that, not just a human or an elf or a gnome, but as the precursor, would we let them? Asked Lyra. Meaning, would we lock them up for doing it, or would we accept it socially? Nissul shuddered at the thought. I should hope not the first. The second, I imagine you'd get different reactions from different people. There are a lot of people, as I know, trust me, who have very complicated reasons for not wanting common incarnate origin to be proven. So if you had someone whose very being and identity moved CO theory out of theory and into established reality, I could foresee issues, said Nissul. Nisul had finished taking the images, so they went for a hike. The site extended much further than most people thought it did, as did most of the foundations and earthworks. Nisul, of course, had been interested in burial sites, and as a result, they stayed near the main city. They took a walk to the western side of the site. Lyra stumbled a bit here and there as she was not used to walking on anything but city streets. Nisul attempted to assist her, but her own dexterity was not much better. "So what was this part?" asked Lyra, taking in the vast overgrown fields before them, pockmarked with structural lumps that used to be buildings. "Farms," said Nisul plainly. "So it wasn't part of the city?" asked Lyra. "No, it very much was. Old cities like this had farms around the walls to support their needs. So who lived here? Would you live in the city, or would you live on the farm?" asked Lyra, a playful grin on her lips. "City for me, always," said Nisul. "Sorry, I meant the proverbial you. Would one have wanted to live out here, or would the lord or the priests or whatever say, 'Peasant, we need you to work the land. Out to the farms with you,'" said Lyra, doing her impression of what some non-specific authority figure in ancient Droathla sounded like in her mind. "Oh, I get what you're asking, but we don't know. Everyone was buried in the city, and we can tell the high-status graves from the low-status, but we can't tell per se who was a farmer. It may have been a choice, or maybe the city fathers gave you your marching orders," said Nisul. "But they wrote stuff down, and they could metacode, right? We've been able to metaprint at least voices since the Crystal Age, right?" asked Lyra. "Yes," said Nisul. "But in terms of meta, in the north, meta impressions are pretty rare, more than 2,000 years old. On the southern continent, they say it's more common for older ones, but they don't share much with us. And between the South's propaganda, Nisul had committed the faux pas of referring to the southern continent by its name. Even nonconformists and progressives like Nisul and Lyra felt a sense of, perhaps, patriotism or community toward the northern continent of Oit, to refer to Lavaras only as the South. However, Lyra heard Nisul's self-criticism of the slip of the tongue, and thought stopping dead in her tracks was perhaps a bit unnecessary. "What were you saying about Lavaras?" asked Lyra. "I was saying, between their own propaganda about them and ours, I don't know what to believe. But in Gel, there are metascrolls in our museum. Beast folk metascrolls, of course, but there's metascrolls from 4,000 years ago. That's why they know more definitives about their past than anyone. And Gel is part of Lavaras, technically. Geographically," said Nisul. "That's the word, technically. I remember the first time I portaled to Gel in school to do a semester there. I thought just that. Technically, I am in Lavaras right now," said Lyra. "Yeah, if you tell someone who's been to Lavaras proper that you were in Lavaras, but what you mean is Gel, you'll get an earful." "But you were saying about Droathla," said Lyra. "We think they wrote on paper and recorded in meta everything we do. Thoughts, poetry, knowledge, literature. But we mostly have what they wrote in stone. That's it," said Nisul. "And?" asked Lyra. "The stone tablets were mostly political propaganda, statecraft, and more than that. Industry, bills of sale, inventory. That shit. So we don't truly have them in their own words. See me when I'm here. I wonder what it was really like to live. You're thinking about what? Bones? Skull shapes and subtle features, hip bones. That is where we see the evolution," said Nisul. "I can't tell a modern elf skeleton from a human," said Lyra. "But, Nisul said after a pause, it's not like I don't think about that. Who stood here? Did someone have their first kiss? Did someone look to the skies when one of the ancient entropies was coming and wonder what the flashes in the night sky meant? Do they wonder who came before them and who could come after? Nissa, Lyra said without thinking. I worry. I worry too much of what you do as escape. Lyra put a hand on Nissel's shoulder. Lyra was expecting a flinch, but none came. Nissel said. Lyra, I can confront my unemployment for most of my life. My mental health, I can confront what's going on between me and my parents. But I can't confront my inherent unhappiness with the existential condition. I can only outrun it. I'm not religious. I can't pretend things are the way I wish they were. The condition of reality and life itself. I can accept they aren't as I wish in a factual sense. I can watch myself if I start to stray toward believing that. But I can't stop the emotional unhappiness that existence itself isn't how I wish it was, Nissel said. I understand. Or I do enough. I wish you were upset over a romance or the weather. I feel I could help you there. Lyra squeezed Nissel's shoulder gently, desperate to offer some form of emotional support. Who says you aren't helping me? Nissel gripped Lyra's hand before removing it as she sat on the ground, indicating she wanted to just stay in this spot a little longer. Lyra followed a few seconds after, also settling in. Nissel removed her boots and socks. Lyra also followed suit. Trying to be not a dark elf? Asked Lyra. Trying to enjoy the sun and give my feet a break because we walked a lot, said Nissel. I know, said Lyra. Can I complain about my husband's weird hobbies? Asked Lyra. You can, but you know I suck as a sounding board. I'll probably tell you his hobbies sound interesting. Nissel smiled. I'm pretty sure we've had this conversation before. I know. I always like it when we do, said Lyra. Lyra's pale foot extended to the ground and disturbed something black and shiny. It was a small, plain black metal ring. She picked it up and found it was either too big or small for any finger. Here, said Lyra with a smile. Nissel, as an archaeologist, should have worried if it was a find versus some recent loss by a tourist. But in the spirit of the moment, slipped on the ring you gave me. Lyra is a good friend, Skully. I know I didn't. I didn't really offer you the wonderful color I usually do there. But Lyra and Nissel might not know who was at Droathla. But I think I knew. And I think they did think about who would come after them. I think we thought about it a lot. Wait, the ring you gave me? Why did I say... Oh, look how fluffy that sheep is, Skully,